In this video, I'm going to talk about two French sound poetry currents that mark the shift from the sound poetry performed with the voice to the sound poetry performed through a tape recorder, to the use of technology. Lettrism and Poésie Sonore. Lettrism was founded by Isidoro Isou. He wrote a manifesto in 1942 when he was still living in Romania, and he arrived in Paris in 1946. He interrupted a performance by Tristram Shandy play, shouting, "Dada is dead and Lettrism is taking its place." Very soon other poets will join, like Gabriel Pomeran, Maurice Lemaitre, Gilles Baudman, and François Dufresne. Lettrism, in common with Futurism, transcended poetics. They wrote about theatre, cinema, painting, even philosophy and economics. And in common with Dadaism, they thrived in polemic and scandal, mainly Isidoro Isou. They use letters as sounds, but also letters as image. They call these new pieces hypergraphics, in which they wrote letters, words, syllables, punctuation marks, with graphics, symbols, handwriting, and drawings. They saw lettrism as a part of a continuum. And to understand that, we have to understand two concepts, amplification and chiseling. For lettrists, any art form goes through a process of establishing itself. That's the process of amplification. For them, in French poetry, that was reached with Victor Hugo. After that starts the new process, called chiseling. And that's a process of self-destruction and reducing. That process was undertaken by Baudelaire, Rimbaud, Verlaine, Mallarmé, and reached the final stage with lettrism. The process of reducing involves passing from the poem to the sentence, to the word, to the syllable, to end in the letter. Lettrism, in this sense, is the final stage in the evolution of poetry. Like other sound poetry currents and movements and artists, they rejected semantics, the meaning of words. Their main innovation is that they transcended the conventional alphabet. They created new alphabetic sounds. In 1947, Isidoro Isou created 19 new vocal body sounds and transcribed them using Greek letters. In 1950, he added more sounds, transcribed them with numbers. This is a very interesting innovation by the lettrists. They added new alphabetic sounds to the conventional alphabet, but in doing so, they are pointing out to the problem that sound poets were still using a finite, limited number of sounds. And that is what prompted some lettrists to splinter and create a new group, the ultra-lettrists, François Dufresne, Gilles Baudman, and others. They didn't want to accept this limitation. François Dufresne was the most clear example of the transition to technology. He created a unique kind of performance with his raw voice and symphonic units, recorded in a tape recorder, that he called rhythms. François Dufresne had also another point of contention with Isidoro Isou, because later on he will use some kind of semantics, a new kind of semantics, in which he used words, splicing them, used in a nonsensical way, quite reminiscent of the Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, like in his piece Le Tombeau de Pierre Larousse. François Dufresne also opened the door to the use of technology and poésie sonore, a term coined by Henry Chopin, the main lead artist in this movement. A poetry that used the full potential of technology in a creative way. He was a promoter, editor, organizer. He published a magazine called OU that accompanied with LPs of sound poets. He organized international festivals of sound poetry, and he also published the first comprehensive history of sound poetry. As well as a promoter of sound poetry, he was an artist. His work at first was still attached to the word, to the letter, like in his piece Soul Air, but very soon all his work was made by and for the tape recorder. The tape recorder and the microphone made possible for first time that the sound poet doesn't have to be using only his own vocal mouth body to perform. From now onwards, the sound poet can record his voice. It can be slowed down, it can be edited, and sound effects could be added. He will use sophisticated microphones to record the subtle sounds of the body. In some occasions, he even swallowed a microphone to record the sounds of his stomach. And he will amplify, overdub, edit the sounds to be able to record the microparticles of the voice. There were other sound poets that participated in poésie sonore, like Bernard Heidsieck, introduced in his poem partitions everyday sounds recorded in the streets, in everyday life, to accompany his performances, in which he performed very fast and quick sentences related to the sounds. It was a way to introduce society in his poems. To summarize, Lettrism transcended the conventional alphabet, introducing new sounds, and that was an interesting innovation in the fragmentation of language. But doing so, they point out to the main contradiction, that they were still using a finite number of sounds. That prompted some lettrists to splinter and try to overcome this limitation, which they did through the use of raw vocal sounds and the use of technology. And that opened the door to poésie sonore, led by Henry Chopin, in which he only used the technology, the tape recorder and the microphone to record the subtle sounds of the voice. In doing so, liberating sound poetry completely from letters, words, and language. And this is an example of how it will sound a clear reading by François Dufresne. And this will be an illustration of how a piece by Henry Chopin will sound.